arguments, and by my count, Mr. Walton, you have 2 minutes, and Mr. Forsten has 11 minutes. So I'll let you two decide how you wish to proceed. Do I understand that Mr. Walton is ceding his time to Mr. Forsten?
No, I'm not ceding. I'm keeping my 2, but letting him go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Forsten. You're up.
Yeah, there's no thing. So it's the same down. Is this working? All right, I got a lot to say, and I got a short amount of time to say it. A lot of what you heard was refuted in our affidavits. I don't know what to say other than maybe people agree. But I'll just start with Ms. Hauffman. She made some arguments that she made in her opening papers, and Mr. Behringer responded to those in his affidavits. She seems to suggest that by violating certain thresholds, it means that we're going to cause air pollution and the air permits can't be granted. That's not what the law says. The law says, regulations say, if you go above certain thresholds, you have to do more, and that's what we're going to do. So what she said just isn't accurate. It's in Mr. Behringer's affidavit. On page 7 of his affidavit, that was Exhibit 20, where he addresses those concerns. You heard about the patent application. This is not the first island data center. We submitted an affidavit for this Wyatt where he listed numerous data centers that are off-grid. So did the city. That's not actually the patent claim. It just is part of the patent claim. It's not the whole patent claim. And in any event, there are plenty of data centers that are off-grid or islands, as Mr. Crystal referred to them. So, again, that was in our papers. There's no claim that noise is going to violate the city code. It just isn't. And if we're complying with the code, this law says that we're no worse than other uses, which also comply with the code, then that's not a basis to say we impair the neighborhood. That's what the law is. I mean, is there going to be noise caused by this use? Well, sure, there's noise caused by every use. But if we comply with the law, that's all we can do. We talked about value a little bit, and again, all I can say to that point is that the study says it didn't apply to cogeneration facilities. A geography professor who couldn't even tell you if somebody could see the cogeneration facility from any direction, nevertheless says, well, I applied this study. That's not evidence of environmental value. Nobody went out and looked at the market to see what would not happen. So, again, I don't know what else to say, but I can't say about that. People questioned our noise study. We didn't actually put our noise study in the evidence. And as I said, noise doesn't matter. Someone said, well, gee, you could put power generation plants into or generators in your backyard, and that means you can do power generation plants. That's not what we're suggesting here. I think, though, that if people decided they wanted their house to be off-grid and they had natural gas generating electric power in their basement, and it didn't violate noise standards, I think that would be permitted. People put solar panels on their houses. Guess what they do? They produce electricity for the house, and the excess power is sold back to the grid. That's a power plant. Again, a lot of what was said, I think, is just unfair stuff. Very misleading about the air permit issues. We're not going to be allowed to make air conditions worse as a matter of getting a air permit. And again, the suggestion is, well, PJM and Washington, D.C. may be doing something. I read you the language that DENREC wrote. DENREC says that PJM to improve Delaware's air quality. I don't know how many more times I have to say it, so I'll stop saying that. I'll just make one final point, and then if I have any other time, I can remain, I'll see it to my friend Max. And that's simply this. I mentioned in my opening, there are a lot of people who support this project, and they're concerned about the city and this country and the state. Everybody, I think, in this room is concerned about those things. But there was a story last year in the news tonight that the population in Newcastle County, 6,500 people moved out, and they weren't replaced. The population in this county is falling, not due to economic development. We're losing jobs, we're struggling. I saw in school growth, and we graduated young kids from high school over the years, and we're creating jobs. And now we have somebody who wants to invest $1.8 billion in this city. We're bringing tax revenue, we're bringing jobs, we're bringing in a cogeneration facility that's not only necessary for the data center itself, but it's actually going to be cleaner than the air. If we can't get this project approved, we're going to chase it out of town. I think we're done. I think we put up closed signs at I-95 North and I-95 South.
Please hold your applause. You're all to be taking away from his time.
That's just how I feel, because I think this is important, and there's nothing that impairs the neighborhood based on anything that's been shown. Not noise, not air quality, and not property values. This is a great location for this site. If you look at that chart, it is tucked in the very back, up against the trees. There's a railroad switching yard on the one side and the northeast corridor. And you're on Route 4, and along the bridge that goes over Route 4, you're not going to be able to see this. If you're on the rest of the, if you're at 896 South College Avenue and looking at the data across the campus, you're not going to see this. It's just not going to have an impact. It should be improved. It's an accessory use.
Mr. Forsten, before you sit down, I have one quick question, and then I believe Mr. Hudson has a question as well. You indicated in your testimony, and I believe it's also in the record somewhere, that there are plenty of data centers that operate off-grid. Could you just very quickly identify in the record where that evidence is?
I have my papers here. If you go to tab 14, it's the affidavit of Bruce Myatt. Exhibit A lists a number of data centers. For example, the first one he lists is a natural gas data center in Colorado that operates off the grid and it's going to sell power to the grid. And then it just goes on and on, listing some. HP is going off grid with the data center. They're there in the affidavit, and there was also affidavits from the city.
My question is, where does the director get the authority to place restrictions on the accessory use?
I think that you have, whenever you're issuing permits, as a matter of general law, you have the inherent authority to say to the applicant, I'm relying on your application. What you're telling me is what I'm judging your application on. And so that's what the city has done. We have said to the city, we're building this cogeneration facility because our data center needs an absolute uninterrupted source of power. Now, we're going to be spinning extra power because if a turbine breaks down, we've got to make sure there's an uninterrupted flow. Well, you know something? We're spinning that uninterrupted power, but we're going to be sending it back to the grid. But that's not our primary purpose. And so we told them we said how much we needed to spin extra, and then rather than waste it, we're just going to send it back to the grid. We agree that we're not going to just have all the turbines running without these.
So your position is that the director has inherent authority to police limitations on zoning?
When you say limitations on the zoning, this is basically just an acknowledgement of what the zoning requires. In other words, they found it to be an accessory use, and in order to be an accessory use, it's supposed to be incidental, subordinate, and customary. And we said to the city, this is what we're going to do. The city said back to us, that's fine, we're taking you at your word. As long as you agree to those conditions, we agree that it's customary and incidental and subordinate.
Let me ask you about the Hoops Bridge decision where it took into account the area of a mile radius. What's your position on that?
Oh, that's the rock quarry case?
Yes.
You know, with all fond affection towards my friend Max Walton, I don't think his neighborhood argument ultimately matters here, because there's no impairment based on the evidence, the hard data in front of you. It doesn't matter whether the neighborhood is just the Star campus, although I understand why he makes that argument. You've got a railroad line and a switching yard on one side, you've got Route 4 on the other at 896. It's a very compact, discrete area. And I understand why he's making that argument. I ultimately don't think it matters. I think there's no impairment based on the evidence in front of you.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Forsten? If not, Mr. Forsten has used all of his time. Mr. Walton, you have 2 minutes if you wish to use them.
Please don't start yet.
In 2 minutes, it's really hard to say everything that I need to. So I'm going to focus on just 2 points. Whether or not the use is customary. Whether the chip is customary to use. And as you may recall, I gave you lots of examples at the beginning. For example, that a tennis court is customary to residential use. That daycares are customary to a church use. That a heliport is customary to a construction. That a 56 megawatt generator for Georgetown University is a customary use. And appellants try to say, well, this is not customary using a dictionary definition. But if you look at every case law, or all the case law, you look at it based on the particular facts of the case. If you go to the slide that we provide, it says the chip is customary for data centers. There's numerous examples that a CHP is customary for a data center use. Finally, with respect to the neighborhood, and I'd like to answer your Cooch's Bridge question. Cooch's Bridge didn't cross any zoning line. That was a Carr 2, as I recall. It wasn't a crossing zoning line. They did a mile because that was the zoning line. It wasn't a district change. It was all within one. But with regard to neighborhood, I don't think on the slide I had, when Mr. Crystal was going through, and he flipped over the definition of neighborhood, the one that I had put up that he had talked about, because it doesn't say what he says a neighborhood should be. His definition of neighborhood, the one that they posited, shows that it has to be the neighborhood. It has to be the first living around. So the bottom line is, I would like to tie up my statements because I'm not going to go over it. But I would like to submit 2 things for the record. One is I had asked Mr. Crystal, who are the Newark residents against the power plant. I never did find out, but they gave me a sheet. They gave me a sheet that says, who are the Newark residents? And they redacted all the names of who they are. But very interestingly, when it comes to the word neighborhood, they all had their neighborhood on it. And guess what? Not one of them lived within the STC district or the A1 district. Finally, I want to submit for the record the Citizens Coalition case. The Citizens Coalition case, which shows that there is a 56 megawatt cogeneration plant is an accessory use to Georgetown University.
Thank you. Mr. Hudson has a question.
Just address one issue on actually the Georgetown case. I'm sorry, to address just one question I have about the Georgetown case with the chip. In that case, it was the university was planning on using up to 98% of the power generated from it.
Well, they were going to use some percentage of the power, and quite frankly, I just don't remember the percentage of power, but the key issue in that case was how it went. Dominion Energy actually used the energy, and it was a power power was actually moved by Dominion Energy, not the university in that case.
But it was only done that way because the university could not physically construct power switching directly to them.
I think that it was done that way. I think that's a fair statement.
My question, I guess, is I'm having issues between the Wiggins case and this. In the Wiggins, called the tow truck case. The issue was the excess number of tow trucks.
Correct, yes.
And like I said, in Georgetown, the projected use, the eventual use was going to be 98% of the power generated. I guess I wanted to just give you the opportunity to clear that up for me. It seems that excess is the amount that is causing an issue.
I understand. You have to look at it based upon required operational need. Okay? And if you take, I'm going to go back to William Palmer. And what that says is you're going to need 14 tow trucks for 3 service bay repair shops. And that's what it was because of the tow. But that because it didn't relate to the actual need of the service bays that were there, you need 14 tow trucks. Here, as we explained in very great detail, the operational need includes not only the power that you're going to use, but also the backup or redundant capacity. The N+2, which we discussed at length, which Mr. Engel discusses, and that's the backup power. So it's much different than when you're leaving the moment for that reason. It's a need.
Are there any other questions, Mr. Walton? If not, by my count, Ms. Hauffman has 32 minutes remaining, and Mr. Crystal has 3 minutes remaining.
I'm sorry, how much did you say?
32.
32.
Yes, you spoke from 7:35 to 7:48, which is 13 minutes. You therefore have 32 minutes remaining.
I thought I had given something to Mr. Crystal. I want to give time I'm not using to Mr. Crystal.
That's fine.
I just have a couple of comments related to the TDC's remarks. TDC said that, sorry, if they go above the threshold, that just means they have to do more. But what doing more doesn't mean is I have to clean it up. I have to get down to the threshold. They're so far over the threshold, they can't bring it down to the threshold. They have to buy the emission reduction credits. And the emission reduction credits do nothing for Newark's air. It's just as polluted, even though they use emission reduction credits to get air permitting. Cleaner than the grid is another catchy phrase, but just because they may be cleaner than the grid, and I don't know if they are or not, that doesn't do anything for Newark's air. Because as Mr. Crystal said, the power going to the grid is coming from a power plant someplace not in Newark. So when you're looking at the impairment issue for Newark, you have to consider Newark and not the overall quality of Delaware, because that's not why we're looking at impairment. We're looking at impairment in the neighborhood in Newark, which includes the vicinity, the proximity to the power plant.
Ms. Hoffman, does that conclude your remarks?
It does, and I'm sorry I didn't ask if you had questions.
That's okay. Are there any questions, Ms. Hoffman? If not, Ms. Hoffman, you've only used 2 minutes of your time. That leaves 30 minutes that you may cede to Mr. Crystal. He also has 3 minutes of his own.
I really do not want to take 32 minutes. I just got a couple. Just to respond to some comments that were made. First, there was the citation to Mr. Mayette's affidavit about the 29 facilities that are off the grid. If you're going to look at that affidavit, I also suggest that you look at Appellants Exhibits 240 and 241. That's where Katie Gifford went and looked at every single one of those citations, as well as the citations by the city, and found that none of them are totally off the grid. Second, Mr. Forsten likes this quotation from the Bloom Energy decision by the Secretary. But the issue of air pollution, let's make sure we're clear what we're talking about. The issue of air pollution is about whether or not there is an impairment of the neighborhood. Ms. Hauffman suggested this, but I just want to emphasize the point. All the Secretary of Denmark said was that there can be a benefit to the air quality of Delaware. That's not the neighborhood. And we wouldn't know if there was a benefit or a detriment to the neighborhood because Denmark doesn't have the monitors in place to be able to answer that question for you. Now, Mr. Walton asks, well, what's our notion of the neighborhood? And I think it's you draw a circle around, centered on the power plant, you draw it around it. Now, whether you call that circle 2,000 feet or you call it a mile or whatever, that's the neighborhood, that's the vicinity. And if there's impacts in those areas, then that's relevant to the 32-53 question. The evidence here shows that there will be pollution in that neighborhood, not miles away, in that neighborhood. And Dr. Pollard, whose affidavit still has not been responded to, says that will cause bad health effects for people who live around the plant, who live in the neighborhood. That's impairment. As well as property values, as well as noise. All those are impairments. And that, I think, is the proof which shows that the January 17th letter was a proper issue. And that's why, again, I ask you to reverse that decision in order to be revoked. That's it.
Questions from Mr. Crystal?
When does something rise to the level of impairment in these factors?
When does something rise to the level of impairment? Well, impairment is defined in Webster's dictionary as being sort of a reduction, a diminishment in value or in strength. So I think when we talk about air pollution, we're talking about are there adverse health effects? If we're talking about property value, is there diminution, noticeable diminution in the value of property of people who are in the neighborhood? And I think with noise, what we're talking about is what's the level now? 30 to 40 decibels. What's the level going to be? 52 or something close to 52. And we measure that difference. That's how I think we figure out impairment.
So under that, under what you're proposing, nothing that can have any emissions could be created there as an accessory use?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I think that I can certainly understand, that there might be some activity there. The question is that activity harming the people in the neighborhood? And what I would suggest to you is that the activity proposed by TDC will do that. But I certainly could see other uses that could be there. And this is what Mr. Forsten was saying, gee, some other use. Of course, he never provided you any other uses that would pollute as much as TDC does. But I think that there are uses that could be done that would not adversely impact health. And set up the solar farm, set up other kinds of things. The University Health Center is not, I think, causing any kind of adverse impacts in terms of worsening people's health. So I think that's the way you can measure it. So I think that there are uses that can be done here that would not do those impairments. And I think that's where I would draw it.
And regarding the noise, it's your position that a accessory use there that is within the legal limits of the City of Newark is still an impairment on property?
Yes, because if right now the Milbury Steeds can go out in their backyard and listen to the birds, and after this plant is built, they can't go out there and hear them anymore, I think that's a diminution in their ability to enjoy their own property. And that's what the evidence shows, because what Mr. Everbach's study said was they're 30 to 40 decibels. And with this plant, which they have said is going to be 110 decibels, the sound of a jet airplane at the stacks at the buildings. But by the time he gets to the property line, we'll make sure that it's only 52. Even at 52, it still covers up those sounds, masks those sounds. The language he used was to alter the soundscape. So yeah, I think that is a change. And I think that's it there.
I just want to be sure. So far, the negative impacts, the negative externalities of the site have been based on concentric circles. So kind of basically either side is trying to elements of it. Did you have anything to process?
I think the concentric circles were, and I'm going to plead ignorance since I didn't draw, but they're obviously an easy way to sort of show relative distance. But, you know, obviously, it's not as simple as concentric, but I think that the people who are close by, like the Milbury Steens and the named plaintiffs that I represent, appellants that I represent, certainly stand to suffer an impact.
Any other questions of Mr. Crystal? If not, are you finished, Mr. Crystal?
I am.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, having heard from all the parties, I think it would be appropriate to close the hearing and enter, for the board to enter into deliberations. So I would recommend you entertain a motion to close the hearing.
May I have a motion to close the hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.